Before I introduce today's speaker, I first want to go over the typical Zoom ground rules. So while Dr. Mahmoudi is speaking, please remain muted. We welcome you to type your questions in the chat at any time. You can access the chat by clicking the chat button in the bottom toolbar. Automated transcription services are available during this event. You can hide or show the subtitles and/or the live transcription via the CC Live button in the bottom toolbar. We are recording this event and we'll have it available on the COS YouTube channel within the next few business days. So participation in the event means you consent to being recorded. I'm very pleased this morning to introduce Dr. Morteza Mahmoudi. Dr. Mahmoudi is an Iranian-American nanotechnologist and assistant professor at Michigan State University. He's a winner of the 2018 Bright Futures Prize, the 2018 Ignite Award, and the 2016 USERN Prize. Dr. Mahmoudi is co-founder of the Academic Parity Movement, which focuses on addressing academic bullying issues in various disciplines. I particularly appreciate that you're here today because he's been hosting a conference as part of that movement on Tuesday and Friday of this week. And we're really looking forward to hearing more about your work, and welcome, Dr. Mahmoudi.
Thanks so much, Randall, for the kind introduction. Hello, everyone. It's a great honor to be here with you today. I'll be talking about basically the need for integrated functioning of all stakeholders to address academic bullying. So my lab has been working in three different fields. Specifically in nanomedicine and regenerative medicine. So in nanomedicine, we basically make nanoparticles for a wide range of diagnostic and therapeutic applications. For regenerative medicine, we are focused on making therapeutics for heart regeneration and patches for healing chronic wounds. And since 2017, we also researching academic bullying, academic harassment, and gender imbalances in science. People often ask me why you are doing research in the field of social sciences. Your background is in nanomedicine and regenerative medicine. And my response is that as a scientist, we are all a building block of the scientific community, and all of us basically share the general mission of science on rigor, ethics, to make basically a world a better place. So we all are responsible and responsible to what's happening in the science backyard. So that is one of the reasons that I basically started researching academic bullying. So let me start off with the general description of abusive behaviors. In general, abusive supervision refers to engaging with people's with offending people's or interfering with their work or their research in a regular manner and over a period of time. And it has different subjects according to the well-established literature, ridiculing a person or put them down in front of others, or being rude to them or lie to them. But in addition to the general items of academic abusive behavior, academic bully has some additional features. They can basically give unfair or bad recommendation. They can threaten the trainee to cancel their visa if they are international, or basically to terminate their job, or basically deteriorate their future careers. And at the institutional level, academic bullying means covering up for bullies and failing to appropriately support targets. So this is unfortunately an age-old issue. If you look back to a century ago, I could say even Albert Einstein was a target of academic bullying. And the reason is that when he basically published his theories, there were 100 authors that wrote a book driven by prejudice in response to Einstein theories, to reject those theories. And when asked about Einstein about this book, he mentioned that why 100 authors? If I were wrong, then one would have been enough. So I think he was pointing out to the critical issue of like ganging up against one person, which we call it today as academic mobbing. And here we are, a century past, and I'm sure many of you heard about like the bullying behaviors of like Eric Lander, which is one of the like prominent scientists and the like former White House officer of science and technology. So it's an age-old, I would say, issue. It needs to be addressed in a timely and a specifically manner. So now the question is that why we have this problem in science and why it's being evolved like over the years. So one of the main reason is that unfortunately, again, our research is kind of set up for bullies to thrive. The strategies that are being available in the institutions and basically the power construct basically make some people to even use bullying as a career tool. So this unfortunate reality caused by the power differences that we have in our like scientific structure. We also lack the robust like educational program about like the differences between academic freedom and academic bullying. So many people basically mix them up either intentionally or non-intentionally. We rely a lot on academic indexes, on like H index, on like awards for like supporting research. And the other problem is the helpless nature of the targets. Universities basically have limited policies on how to support targets of academic bullying. And this lack of support comes from the lack of budget and lack of like educational program. The other issue is the funding. Many of the perpetrators basically are well funded. So the universities have many other things to compromise when they basically investigate the issue of academic bullying, and the lack of insight about the long-term costs of academic bullying. So here is one example of like falsifying clinical data because of the bullying that happened at Duke University. And NIH basically fined the university for over $100 million. And there are other like costs on other universities that I'm sure you've heard in like many news around academic bullying. So one of the gray area in the academic bullying is the lack of education, like I mentioned. Many people basically use academic freedom as a backdoor to justify like bad bullying behaviors. So academic freedom means basically giving basically the safe environment to researchers to express their basically ideas and do research in any field they want and draw any conclusion without fear of retaliation. So like a good example is that like my research is not in the field of academic bullying. My research is in regenerative medicine and nanomedicine. And that's why Michigan State University hired me. But Michigan State University doesn't basically prevent me in researching academic bullying and academic harassment. So that's academic freedom. On the other hand, academic bullying has a very clear range of actions that I basically summarize them in this short video. We can watch together.
Academic bullying in higher education may not be as well publicized as school bullying, but it is very real. It's important to know the types of academic bullying so you can help yourself and others. Many suffer unnecessarily under academic bullying. If you experience any of the behaviors in this video, you're a target of academic bullying. The good news is we can help.
My supervisor would tell me I'm incompetent and ridicule me. I stopped sharing my ideas.
My supervisor would belittle me in front of others. I didn't know what to do.
My supervisor would never let me work on team projects that all my coworkers worked on.
My supervisor gave me a bad recommendation, even though I performed very consistently.
My institution wouldn't take fair and unbiased action to address the unethical treatment we received or noticed.
Okay, so the other reason that we have the problem of academic bullying in our science backyard is the fact that academic bullies are clever. Any targets basically for making a formal complaint to the universities need some documents to back up like their allegations. And academic bullies basically rarely leave any trace of their actions. I mean, many of the meetings may happen behind the closed doors. They, in severe cases, they may also force lab members basically to sign away their rights, or they maybe violate the authorship positions. And the situation, as you may agree with me, would be more harder for international students as they have like a language and cultural barrier in addition to like their visa issues. So the other problem is the lack of law in academic bullying. So I had a chance to have interview with like over 100 lawyers in the United States about academic bullying and legislations around it. And the message was simple. Academic bullying is unethical, but it's not illegal. So they can basically do complain when academic bullying basically gets connected to sexual harassment or any kind of discrimination. The other problem is lack of psychological knowledge. Again, we don't know how to help targets. The science like behind academic bullying, at least from the side effects, is not well understood. But one thing is well understood, and it's that if the targets of academic bullying or harassment remains unhealed, they are at the risk of like being future bullies through the psychological unconscious issue, which is called identifying with the harasser. So leaving targets unhealed may make universities like the bullies factories. The other problem is the lack of fair and unbiased investigation, internal investigation by many institutions. For example, like very recent complaint against Harvard University mentioned that the university basically failed to fairly consider years of like complaints by targets on like couple of sexual harassers for many years. So this is one problem. The main problem is that when even we hear about the scandals of academic harassment at the universities, we rarely hear about like statements from internal committees. So they don't be audited. They may have something to compromise, including universities' reputations. Universities have like limited options to offer to targets. Bullies may have connections and may get rid of like the complaints or get basically exempt through the investigation process. And like I mentioned before, targets are kind of helpless. And the other issue is the willingness to tolerate bullying behaviors. Imagine if we have like a PhD student that is in the last year of like his or her work, depends their degree on the type of publications that they need to have like for getting their degree signed off by the supervisors. They have more reasons to basically tolerate the bullying behavior. And those things may be more escalated in the high rank universities. And the reason is that like any person can be easily replaced by like other candidates. So they have to basically tolerate the situation. In addition, they may fear from retaliation over their career. They face problems with mobbing or ganging up against them. If they are international students, they may have visa cancellation. And the last problem is the confidentiality of the internal investigation outcomes, unless it reaches to like media, like many scandals that we saw in the last year. Most of them basically remains confidential and basically nothing happens. So the question would be, what targets do? Fight, flight. Unfortunately, studies show that targets basically only tolerate the situation and have to deal with like the huge side effects. But the bad news is that those side effects basically do not only affect targets, but also affect their families and the people of the circle of their influence. Imagine if the bullying behaviors happens in a hospital setting, in a healthcare setting, they may end up with avoidable, like wrong medical decisions that may even compromise patient health. So in order to address like academic bullying because of all of these problems that I've mentioned, many individual stakeholders basically took some actions. For example, individual researchers tried to do like surveys about academic bullying in a specific field, or journalists tried to write about it. My colleague Sherry Moss at Wake Forest University and I basically ran a global survey about that. Many other scientists basically wrote about the issue in journals with broad audiences. So here is basically a summary of our global survey. What we have done, we basically ran a survey, discipline-specific survey, and we basically gathered over 2,000 response from targets, mostly from graduate students and postdocs from the United States. We asked specifically for contextual behavior of academic bullying because we were very interested in understanding what are the pain points, at least to the location and to the discipline-specific targets. The general outcomes was very disappointing. Almost over 70% of respondents basically mentioned that they didn't report bullying behavior. And from those that reported bullying behavior, only 8 of those identified the investigation process as a fair and unbiased. And most of them, unfortunately, were from high-ranked university, both targets and witness of academic bullying. Like I mentioned, there are many reasons for that, but one example could be like a harasser can do the harassment for decades, and then university finally take actions after many years. So you can imagine that those kinds of reports basically send positive signals to perpetrators that they are being protected. So they are okay if they continue doing the harassment, at least for decades. And it also sends negative signals to targets that the only way they can do is to tolerate the situation and basically leave the institution as soon as possible for them. So we also get over 700 narratives, and we analyze them. And again, as you see, close to 90% of the people who basically did not report bullying mentioned that it's because of the fear of retaliation. And they had also examples that the people who spoke up basically got their career destroyed down the road. And some of these narratives has been highlighted by Science Courier article last year. So the other important stakeholders are publishers. For example, after the case of George Floyd, ACS, which is a famous association in chemical sciences, published an article in one of their journals called ACS Applied Materials and Interfaces, an article titled Confronting Racism in Chemistry Journals. And in order to echo their voice, other journals in the same society publish the exact same thing. So it's for the sake of awareness, for increasing awareness about the case. So what I'm trying to say is that publishers did their share or are doing their share because they can increase awareness, although the reports may not be the exact scope of their journals. But the thing is that the cases of imbalances in diversity, sexual harassment, and academic bullying are the general science problem. So it affects journals and their reports and even scientific integrity, regardless of the specific scope of any journals. For example, we basically investigated like gender imbalances in Nobel Prize winners, and we published the data in Lancet, although the Lancet's basically main scope is not those things. Or we published strategies to address academic bullying and Gevante chemistry, which is like chemistry specific journals, but they were very cooperative with that. This is very important to know that although individual stakeholders may take some actions, those kinds of actions may not be adequate. And a good example is the NASEM report on 2018, where they basically mentioned that despite of having legal actions, clear education, and punishment by funding agencies, universities basically punishment by funding agencies, there's little evidence that the incidence of sexual harassment were reduced. So it's very interesting. We have everything in place, but when a stakeholders doesn't work together, doesn't have like interdependent actions, we may not see the results that we want to see. So we basically proposed a timely and effectively actions on academic bullying if we can basically make a platform that can connect stakeholders together. So if various stakeholders works together, they may actually be able to diminish academic bullying. For example, I've talked about the institutions, they have like many things to compromise. Harasser may have like maybe well-funded, may brings lots of money to the university, or internal investigation committee may not be accountable. But when we couple basically their actions with funding agencies, then the story would be different, because the harasser doesn't get funding by the funding agency. A good example is like the actions that Wellcome Trust, which is a UK-based funding agency that basically done for a well-funded researcher at the University College of London, where when they basically got the information on the harasser, they basically withdraw the funding. And that basically helped the university to take action against the harasser. Or the other thing is the policy makers. For example, if policy makers or decision makers basically consider like adding the anti-bullying records of the universities or hospitals to the ranking system, then they would be more responsible for better addressing like academic harassment. Or the other issue we have is the current rankings, like a ranking of researchers with like H-index, the number of publications they have, and all of the funding may be kind of evaluated based on those rankings, which makes basically or put a lot of pressure to the researchers to be in the competition and then basically make the academic environment more toxic. Or what we lack is the emergence of the global committee that basically can have access to the report and investigation of the internal committees and can audit them. So in the presence of such entity, the internal investigation process may be more fair and unbiased. So we have a good example for that. For example, we have like a committee of publishing ethics, COPE, which they founded that committee like over 20 years ago. And now their protocols on how to basically investigate plagiarism allegations and how to withdraw the papers and retract the papers basically are followed almost by all of the scientific papers. So, so having such like global entity with authority to basically review the allegation of the investigation committee would be very helpful. So by making such platform, we suggest that the scientific community can basically create like a standard and global definition of academic bullying. So there would be no gray area between academic freedom and academic bullying. We can basically create many resources for the targets, which is lacking right now. We know like how to investigate allegation of like academic harassment. Universities have great guidelines, but after validation, basically, again, it's a gray area. The policies are not clear. How to support targets, how to punish bully, how basically make sure that those incidences doesn't happen again. The scientific community can demand for establishment of the global committee. We may have like anti-bullying records available to funding agencies and other like stakeholders to take a look. Institutions in the presence of interdependence connection between stakeholders may create more fair anti-bullying policies. They have like a robust protocol in considering those and be more efficient, like with the targets and with the bullies. They may have like some continuous monitoring plans. At least when they get the incidence of the report on the incidence of academic like harassment in specific departments, they can basically put more monitoring on them, and they can stop supporting and covering up for bullies and stop passing the harasser to other universities. Funding agencies can create like zero policy, zero tolerance policy against like bullies to make sure that the harasser basically can't get like passed to other universities, which unfortunately we have a couple of examples for that. So in this situation, in order to increase awareness and basically make a platform to connect the stakeholders together and work together, we basically established the Academic Parity Movement, which is a nonprofit organization with a simple message that the same human rights that apply outside the lab apply inside of it. And for now, we basically in the past like couple of years, we were focused on like increasing awareness. Our midterm goal is to basically select some targets with specific evidences and basically help them to do like legal actions against perpetrators. And we basically try to support them to basically send the positive signals to other targets that it's time to speak up. And our long-term goal is to basically connect different stakeholders together and be able to finally make interdependence dialogue between them to finally diminish academic bullying. So our basically advisors and directors are from different fields, from different countries. And the reason is that we wanted to better understand the root causes of academic incivility, bullying, and harassment in different fields and also different cultures to be able to better develop like guidelines and increase awareness about that. So far, like I mentioned, our focus was on increasing awareness. So our team have published over like 20 papers about the field in like the journals with broad audiences. We also provided informal advice for over like 700 targets. And from last year, we started like narrative target story series, which we basically cover targets stories that can be useful for other targets to like define or choose how to basically respond to their own situation. Thank you so much for taking time to listen to my presentation, and I would be very happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great, thank you so much. If folks would like to either put questions in the chat or you can raise your hand and ask your question directly, we have a good amount of time for questions. Hazel, would you like to ask one?
Thank you very much. Could we stop screen sharing so that we could see each other maybe?
Definitely, sure.
Thank you so much. Dr. Mahmoudi, thank you so much for being with us today and for that really, clear and thoughtful presentation. This is incredibly important stuff. And, one of the things that I think is so important is that as we train investigators to enter academia, we think about who they are and how they are going to develop. We think now more about sort of what's going on, how to deal with people who don't understand the impact of bullying, who don't understand respectful behavior, or, for whatever reason, are engaging in it. But I'm really interested in thinking about how do we raise the next generation of academics? Where do we start? How can we intervene, guide is a better word, at what stage of our students' development, our trainees' development, those who are going to, whatever they're going to do in the workforce. And I wonder what thoughts you have there, because of course we would like this to be not punitive going forward. We would like to raise a generation of investigators and people involved in science who truly understand the landscape, so that as we go forward, the landscape shifts. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are about training the next generation to understand and not be bullies.
Yeah, that's a fantastic, I would say, question. I mean, I don't have definite answer for that, but I can basically share my thoughts about that. I mean, one of the issues, like I mentioned, is the absence of successful investigation of the cases around academic bullying. I mean, we have some sort of cases that reaches to the media. They are from high-profile bullies that basically did harassment for decades. It's very frustrating for the community, because many people can think about the fact that these are only a few examples that reach to the media, and many others are just swept under the carpet. So what happens is that I think the negative signals that we send for the targets should be changed. We need to have more examples of how universities or departments basically support targets. Instead of having like all of the media to the punishment of the harassers, it would be have good examples of what happened to the targets, how the university basically tried to help them, tried to heal them. There are many stories that we hear from, like a kid that have an abusive parent. And when they get to the parenting position, they would be abusive as well. And this is the problem. So if we don't get like targets healed, then unconsciously or unintentionally, our universities would be a factories for future bullies. So I think this would be one of the main things that needs to be considered by the scientific community. The other thing that I would emphasize is that we need to put like the real, I would say, reason for doing science in training more clearly. I mean, when I think about why someone like Marie Curie was in science is very promising for many people. She basically carried like an X-ray machine with her daughter, which got like Nobel Prize later on in her life, to the battlefield to help people to identify, like to diagnose their bone break area to repair them. So this was why they did science. The stereotype of the current scientists is kind of different, having like publications in Nature, Science, being successful in like financial things, establishing companies. I'm not saying that those things are bad. I'm saying that like the stereotype of a scientist, at least from the view of the young generation, should be different than what we have right now. And the other thing, like I mentioned in my presentation, which is missing, is the proactive functioning of all the stakeholders. Universities, institutions by their own cannot address this issue. We need contribution of other members of the scientific community and also the public to be able to basically advocate and establish very safe and health environment that young generations basically can learn from. So like I mentioned, one issue is that for academic bullying behaviors, it's been around for a long time. No one talks about it. It's like a before Me Too movement and after Me Too movement. We need to make an environment that everyone can feel safe enough to talk about it. And then when you talk, when you increase awareness, when you have bystanders and witness like proactive about the issue, then we can resolve this. And next generation would benefit from it.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
I wonder, following up on that question a little bit, if you, I mean, you don't have to name names, but is there a, are there any institutions or organizations that you feel like are doing a good job at this? And if so, what are the main things that they are doing? Is there anybody that's a good example in this, you know, in this landscape?
Yeah, we actually have a speaker in tomorrow's presentation, Dr. Susan Bond from University of South Carolina. They basically have a very clear guidelines and civil program that is actually online. I can basically share the information. I mean, I'm sure many institutions have the same thing, but this university has a specific programs that basically clearly have examples of what happens after allegation, what happens after validating the allegations of bullying or harassment behavior, how the response would be. And they also have some successful examples within the website, which, like I mentioned, send the positive signals to other targets that they are being supported by the university. I'm sure there are many other universities around that have those policies, good example of the policies. But this is the one that I'm basically familiar with.
Great, thank you. We have a question in the chat. Tori, would you like me to read it, or do you want to ask it?
Sure, I can go ahead and ask it. This is kind of building on Dean Siv's question, but one question that's actually come up a couple of times during this series, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, is how do we disrupt the cycle of folks who say, well, this is how it was for me, and so this is the approach that I'm going to take. And so, how can we sort of interrupt this pay it forward mindset? And I guess we're obviously a mixed audience, but I'm particularly curious from the perspective of early career researchers who often have less influence and less power. And yeah, just to hear your thoughts on that idea.
Yeah, thank you. That's actually a great question. I mean, the problem, like you mentioned, is a power difference that we have. The power difference in academia is kind of, I would say, unique. And the reason is that basically the dependency of the trainee is fully rely on the PI. So PI have so much power to the trainee. So if, like I mentioned, if we can't break that one directional dependency, then there's no chance actually to disrupt this cycle. So one thing is the dependency. The other thing is like proper education. It's okay to feel that, like, if you tolerate a situation or a particular behavior that made you successful in your career, but it's not okay to think that you can apply that like particular experience to other people. So that's why I'm emphasizing on the educational part, on defining the gray area and boundaries between academic freedom and academic bullying, because if you don't know that particular action is actually harassment, is academic bullying, you may apply it for other people and then justify it as academic freedom. Whereas if you have definite like information about those behavior, you may not like do the same thing. But again, one other thing I would like to emphasize is that even former targets of academic harassment of any kind needs to be healed. Otherwise, they may try unconsciously to heal their wounds by identifying with the harasser and do the same thing.
Any other questions from the group, either in the chat or feel free to just unmute and ask. All right, well, please join me in thanking Dr. Mahmoudi for sharing this important work. We would appreciate your feedback on today's event, and I'll put a link in the chat for a survey. You'll also get an email with that survey. And yeah, if you'll all just help me thank Dr. Mahmoudi. We really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. And
Thank you.
I mean, I'm always available through my email. So if you have any follow-up questions, or I can be of any type of help in creating like a healthier environment, I would be more than happy to be.
Thank you so
Wonderful.
much, Dr. Mahmoudi, and thanks to Associate Dean Hughes for organizing this session with you. Much appreciated, Randall. Great to see everybody.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you. Bye-bye.